For Latin Business Today, I'm Michael Ambrosino. Today we have the Latin Business Today Music Roundup, a collection of musical professionals who have very different approaches towards being in the business of making music during COVID-19. Joining us today is Doug Beavers, the Grammy Award-winning trombonist, composer, arranger, producer, and mix engineer, who's also the new founder of a brand new record label and production company called Circle 9. David Koch is a drummer, guitarist, composer, arranger, mixing engineer, and producer. And when he's not making music with one of his various bands, he composes music for television. We also have Jenny Pulido, the marketing, branding, and social media strategist who's part of Oscar Hernandez's new Ovation booking agency. She also handles all of the booking for the Spanish Harlem Orchestra. And Rich Tozzoli, a producer, composer, mixing, and audio engineer who's a Grammy-nominated producer, mixer, and composer whose music is featured on well more than 1,000 television series. Great to have you all with us.
Hello. Good
Pleasure.
to be here.
So Rich, I started using computers back in the late 80s. My first, not to date myself, but my first computer was an Apple Macintosh SE30. And what I remember back then was audio actually took precedence over video, that the first people to take that computer apart and really hack it and do some amazing things were the audio enthusiasts. Can you talk about when you first got serious about digital audio and started building your own home studio?
Yeah, I was pretty early, very early in the days of audio on the digital waveform. And I was one of the first guys around with Pro Tools. And I remember even, believe it or not, showing a lot of my friends what the internet was. And it's pretty funny to think about that. They're like, what is the internet? I actually showed them. Remember the dial-up sound? We used to have to do that. But I was very early adopter of digital audio, and I knew that that was the future, and I invested into it hard and heavy in the early days, and it paid off, to say the least.
Well, I follow Doug Beavers on social media. If you do that periodically, you see him hugging things like a brand new 88-key keyboard or showing off these two beautiful new mixing consoles that he uses with Pro Tools. And Doug, I know you've been a Pro Tools geek forever.
Yeah.
You've really invested a lot in your home studio. Can you kind of tell us how it's enhanced your career over the last 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, basically, when you make it's a decision you make. You know, when you make the decision to be more hands-on and to dive into that technical aspect of the music, which is not just recording it, not just producing it and getting musicians and yada yada, but when sonically and from an audio standpoint you decide to command how, and I think Rich knows about this and probably David too, obviously, you decide exactly how your music is portrayed, right? So if you really want at this certain part, you need like a lot of bass, you know, so you're gonna crank up that 60 hertz at that point. You know, it could be in a anyway, not to get too technical about it, but it's all about really honing the sound that you want specifically to deliver to your listeners. And that was really the fascination. And if you rewind, actually, I was in briefly, I was in Astoria in 2005, and I was still touring with Eddie Palmieri. And I decided to start my Pro Tools adventure. And to do that, I actually found I think you guys would know about this. It was a 002. And the 002 was just like an 8 fader thing. I found one in Jacksonville, Florida at a super pawn, and coincidentally had it sent up to Astoria, New York, and learned on that thing. And that's where I really got Pro Tools together, you know, and fast forward to now. Still, Pro Tools is amazing because you could still be learning it 10 years later. But it was really all about that, really trying to get into the sounds and get into exactly what you're looking for. And as an arranger and a composer, those really, you know, Pro Tools really offer the tool and the plugins and everything else that we use really offered me the opportunity to do that and to really dial that in and to deliver my sonic vision, you know, to my audience.
Well, as someone who's worked in radio broadcasting for several decades now, I remember, 20, 30 years ago, musicians would often have home studio spaces where they could practice, but not necessarily everyone would have places where they could record or play with audio. And David, you're a working musician who, if I understand correctly, you've learned audio production skills at home. So I almost sense that you kind of gravitated like Doug has from being a musician to being curious about production skills. Can you kind of talk about your technological or technical evolution and what resources did you really need in the beginning to learn how to master all the tools?
Well, it's kind of a funny thing, you know, Doug, it's funny you mentioned the 002. I had
Yeah.
a 002R, the rack version of that.
You had the rack.
Yeah.
Did,
I
did
still
you
do it
modify it?
downstairs, but it piled up with the other stuff in my old technology museum.
Yes.
But yeah, so I've had Pro Tools forever, but only like I barely even scratched the surface. I would use it for, you know, doing band demos, things like that. So I'd use it intensely for a few weeks and then not look at it again for another year, maybe even longer. So I didn't really know a whole lot about it. I just knew the basics. I didn't know a whole lot about mixing and, you know, just all the things that, all the physics of sound that come with that, and trying to understand why your mixes are muddy and not as clear as other stuff you hear. And I mean, and that being said, I was working a full-time job, you know, day job back then. So I really didn't have a ton of time. It really wasn't until probably a few years ago when I, you know, really kind of started diving deep into it. And, you know, it's like Doug says, it's like, you know, you could be, we can fast forward 30 years from now and I'll still be learning something new about it. You know, it's just a rabbit hole that keeps going. You can never learn enough. Like, I mean, I swear it's like you need to constantly be just mastering your craft and, you know, listening to people, watching people, you know, talking to your friends who do this. You know, Rich has been invaluable to help me become a much better mixer. You know, and it's kind of funny coming from the world of playing live music, you know, like Doug was talking about. You know, now you're crafting your own music. And, you know, when I used to write for any of my original bands back, my original rock bands back in the day, it was always about the riff and complexity. And, you know, you're almost thinking too much about things as opposed to sitting back. And I would say one of the most, you know, important things that Rich has kind of showed me is that you can, the simpler, the better in so many cases. I mean, you can get your point across with production on so many levels, as far as creating intensity and just the mood that you're going for, as opposed to writing some complex guitar riff that, you know, kind of sounds cool, but, you know, it just kind of is what it is. But, you know, I would say, you know, just the past 3 years have been, I've you know, kind of delved into it, you know, full force, you know, subscribed to a number of tutorial services, you know, to just watch what, you know, all these, you know, Grammy award-winning engineers are doing and their techniques. And it's absolutely mind-boggling, the intensity that a lot of these guys, you know, go through, like the depths of detail they get into to make a mix sound phenomenal, you know. So
and not only that right now, but what I've noticed is because many musicians have seen their work really cut back because of COVID. A lot of production companies are really struggling. Obviously, live performance has been hit really hard. Musicians have had to transition their studios, and Doug, I know you do this a lot, to video, to being on social media. And so, Jenny, I was curious, you've always had a keen eye for how musicians are evolving their brands and their personalities through social media. What have you seen musicians do, you know, at home to make them stand out on social media and keep the momentum for who they are, their personalities, so that hopefully when venues start opening up, they can hit the ground running again?
Great question. Well, one of the things that I've absolutely enjoyed is that there's a lot of musicians and or artists that have tapped into their people, their group of people. So there are some that are doing interviews with fellow artists, musicians, producers, and it's wonderful to see that real the friendliness, that true authentic friendship that they have, right? Because they either have gigged with them before, they've been on the road, so it's almost kind of like a behind the scenes of what these relationships are that these artists have that are on the road, but you get to participate in it versus seeing it like on a talk show host where it's kind of scripted. So there's kind of the banter and these backstories that they have, and they let you in. It feels more intimate that way. So I've seen a lot of artists, especially musicians that have capitalized off of that, and they'll have a weekly show. They come up with cool creative names, and they have these really their family and friends. That's who these artists are, and producers that have been on the road with them. A lot. I've seen a lot step up and run their own master classes, which has been really cool. And then of course Zoom. I think a lot of people started with the Zoom and doing the you know, either duets or something like that, or the whole band, and then now it's kind of expanded and they're seeing, oh, you know, there's other things that we can do. So that's been really nice to see people hear their voice, actually, especially the ones that are behind the scenes. You know, that aren't the front singers. You know, it's awesome to really hear their stories. It's also motivating for other people that are trying to figure it out, and they're like, oh my God, that's cool. Doug has a home studio, you know, all those things that they'll, you know, oh, David and Rich do this. Oh shit, oops. That's where I'm at, you know? So it's kind
That's
of.
culture, baby. That's culture.
I am passionate about what I do. Okay, so no, so that's just been really cool, learning new things. Like I said, it's a much more intimate engagement, and you feel like you know them, you know? So once the doors open and you're like, oh, you know, I'm gonna go see Doug. Doug's performing at da-da-da-da. I caught him when he was doing this great interview, blah, 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 or whatever, you know? So I like the way I've seen some of those things out there that they're doing.
You know, having been in technology for several decades, I remember when designers didn't used to design, they used to actually sit behind with someone who then worked the computer. And there's this very funny relationship where I'm going to tell you what to draw, but can you draw it for me? Because I don't know how to do that. Now musicians have to be a jack of many trades. And Doug, I see you do this extremely well, where design, video, audio, social media. I was wondering if you could just briefly describe what you think the musician's 21st century toolkit looks like these days.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly more than you know, shedding your axe and getting up and that's it. And I mean, and I really admire, you know, guys who have come to the point where they could just sit and shed, you know. But I think as everybody here knows, it's so much more than that. And especially, you know, if you want to go public, if you're trying to, you know, share what you're doing. I mean, we could all just play music, right? Be at home, and yeah, we have gear. This is cool. But are you connecting to people? And that's one thing I really feel strongly about is am I connecting with the music? And it influences how I compose. It influences like the product, you know, all the production stuff I do down the line. You know, I don't like super complicated songs. I really want to bring people in. And as part of that, we have to make it known. And you know, the for me, the switch flipped, I think in 2000, after I did this extravagant non-net record. And, you know, I had a nice budget that I got from another record. I'm like, okay, I'm going to come, you know, I'm going to come back to New York. So I split for a little bit, and we're going to do this incredible non-net record. And we're going to, you know, we're going to write stuff, you know, in 4/2 time. And we're going to do the triplet and the triplet half note is going to be the new pulse. I mean, like all that stuff. And you guys know what I'm talking about, right? And, you know, I did that and it was cool and the music was cool, but it was a great jazz record and musicians were like, yo, I love that record. We love that session, but did it really connect? You know, and that's to come back to the point, Michael, like are you connecting? You know, and what social media has really offered us is the opportunity to explicitly connect with your audience. You can find an audience and you connect with that audience, right? And Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, they all do different things. And as part of the modern musician's toolbox, just to come back to that, if it is on you to promote yourself, then you kind of have to know, not kind of, you do have to know what those different social media entities mean, what they do, how they work together. That's a big part of it. Also realizing the need for high quality visuals, you know, because the music has to be represented by visual. Why? Because not everybody just has this keen oral sense. Oh, that music is beautiful, blah, blah, blah. They might have in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, but today, not so much. People need that visual connection to what you're doing. So what that means is great cover art, great graphics on, you know, anything that you put on social media should be of a high level of, you know, representation. so that's really, I feel like the visuals and the whole multimedia aspect of what we do should be in line with the quality of the music that you produce, you know. So yes, we did start a new, you know, label at Circle 9, and I'm really proud of that. Put a lot of work into that, and a lot of time and planning. But a lot of that was, for me, great production quality and great presentation has always been central in my just my whole concept. And I think everything should work synergistically to deliver that, because I think it really it grabs your listener more. And you know, just like you compose to grab, you know, and these guys, they're composing for TV and everything else. They know how to grab the listener immediately.
Well, actually, it's funny
There's
you
no
mention that,
question about
because I mean, Rich, that is your gift, is you grab people. You basically compose. And I was watching a YouTube video on the pop producer Oak Felder, and he's worked with Demi Lovato and other people. And I thought of you because this guy lives in his studio. And when he's not living in his studio, he lives on a laptop. And it made me wonder what your impression was of the evolution of home studios, where they're so well equipped. And if you become talented enough to use it the way people use instruments, can you really compete with a major label, with a major recording company, just by working from your own home?
Without question. No doubt about it. You would never know. Right, Dave? Dave and I talk about this all the time.
Yeah. I mean,
The tracks that Dave and I are doing and Dave and I record in big rooms too, by the way. So we have access to both. But the small rooms are equally as effective, but you have to know what to do with it. And I always say, I like to compose and I take the technology out of the loop. So the technology has nothing to do with what I do. It helps me. Pro Tools is my ally, but I know it so well that it's never in the way. Honestly, it's not about the gear. It's about the ear. I always say that.
But Rich, if you can go back to the ear, because if I were to say, you know, as a broadcaster, what kind of music really appeals to me? Obviously, smart composition, good arranging, understanding of music theory, a technical understanding of your instrument, being able to embrace an audience, telling a story. What are the equivalents when you're composing in your studio?
I'm not exactly sure of your question, but I'm just going to note that when I write a piece of music, you know how and everybody knows, you know, get to the chorus, don't bore us. I do not have time. I'm basically getting to the chorus in 5 or 6 seconds, and Dave and I talk about that all the time too. Like if I don't hit something within 10 seconds of exactly where I'm going to go with this piece, it might not register with the editor who the person I'm writing the music for. I don't write for my ego. That's another thing. I have zero ego. I'm writing to as you put it, to make a stock that I'm getting dividends on.
It's gonna be a little hard for the audience to understand when we had a conversation. So David, I noticed that in your story, you worked for a corporate firm, and then you decided, you know what, it's really not the kind of quality of life I want right now. I'm going to dive into music creation. And you know, you had to broaden your skill set. I think you do web design, you do some programming, and you're also a musician. Then you have your own, and then you freelance as well. So, what is your skill set to keep you competitive in the marketplace?
Are you saying on a like music based or?
The part of the question is a lot of musicians can't just do music anymore. So they have to have a diversified skill set to approach what is an ever-changing marketplace. And I wonder, how do you have to do that with the work that you're trying to entail?
Well, number one, I would say, you know, it's the weirdest adjustment. You know, I had worked for corporations for, you know, most of my life, and it's weird. You know, it's weird to have the security of a paycheck and benefits and all these things, and then to suddenly leave that and know it's all on you. And you need to kind of figure it out and write your own ticket. And one of the things that I think that I kind of figured out kind of quickly along the way is that, you know, it's about multiple revenue streams, you know. So, you know, while, you know, my main focus is writing, you know, TV music, on the same token, I play in a number of bands and I make money doing that. You know, and I try to make those bands be higher profile bands that get paid more than just your average bar band, you know. then there are other things I've done. You know, I have a technology background in digital advertising. So even after I left my company, I still consulted for them for a while. And actually right before COVID was in talks with a former vendor of mine, actually, who had reached out to see if I wanted to come work there. And I told him I absolutely do not ever want to go work for a corporation again. But that I'd be interested in some mild freelancing, you know, project-based, you know, a couple weeks here, a couple weeks there, that kind of thing. The other side of it has been investing in the markets, you know, and which is its own learning curve. You know, getting into it is you know, heavily as I've been wanting to get into it, but obviously, you know, that can be dangerous too. So I try to surround myself with people who know it well.
I'm going to just interrupt, Dave, and say you and I spend a lot of time talking about investing. When I go to your house, we're watching CNBC. We're not watching music stuff. We talk a lot about stocks, and all my gang, all our troops, right, Dave? We're all very into investing.
Absolutely, it's right. If a group text could go around on any morning that, you know, has to do with a new track one of us is working on, or Pro Tools, or a new piece of gear, or it is just as easily be, oh God, did you see what Apple did today? You know, like you know, it's just we're all kind of into it. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people don't kind of look at, is that, you know, how you can make your money work for you if you're smart about it, you know?
So in other words, if you're going to really work so hard so that your music can make money, make sure that your money works as hard.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
So,
you know, and it's actually kind of ironic, you know, Rich and I were both finance majors in college, you know, back in the day. We both, you know, worked in that field for about 10 seconds, you know, versus the grand scheme of our lives. It's totally not what I'm about, or you know, I don't want to speak for Rich, but I kind of know not what he's about.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the only reason I chose to be a finance major was because I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life at the time, you know, and I just thought, right, whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, a broker on Wall Street, or a rock star, it's probably good to know what to do with the money you're making, you know, so.
Jenny, something that you and I talked about a couple of weeks ago, or actually more like a couple of months ago, was before COVID, you had these fascinating, really granular ideas about where you could book the Spanish Harlem Orchestra. Really fascinating way of matching specific audiences with what the Spanish Harlem Orchestra does, but also kind of bending some of the rules and getting them into some venues that would be unique opportunities for them. And then COVID hit. And I'm curious, with COVID, do you feel like you can do the same thing in a virtual platform? You know, are bands going to be able to do anything online that matches what they can do live? And does it have the same engagement and intimacy that live performance has?
I think that it's very possible. The thing that, you know, that I've been researching as I've been, you know, reaching out is several things, right? Like if you're going to do something, if you're going to do a live stream, it's like either you're going to do it yourself, and we either, you know, do it all in one room, right? And we do it like we would in a concert hall, right? Or we're going to do it via Zoom with all the gallery view squares, and makes it a little bit more intimate, I guess. Or we go all out and we find like sponsors to pay the whole bill and take us into, you know, an empty venue, but at least we have all the bells and whistles. So I think we could still go ahead and niche down, but it's just finding what suits us best. So what I've been doing now is just reaching out to advertising agencies to see what type of projects they're open to funding, right? And then pitching, you know, concept that we have in the band and who we are, and we represent many Latin American countries and different genres, and just who the band members themselves are, because they stand alone, you know, without being part of the ensemble. So that's one of the very special things I think that Spanish Harlem brings to the table. So we're getting closer, because what we want to actually do is have a stream a performance in a venue, and have that sponsored, so we could also work with with different sponsors so they can connect with their target audience. And that's just bringing in my background from working in advertising agencies and being able to talk to them to say, listen, we're going to be able to connect with your consumer. It's not just going to be your logo on a step and repeat banner. Like, we're going to do different things that tap into who your target is, so we could sell your product, basically, is what that, that is, talking their talk. So I've been able to infuse that background and experience that I have as I reach out. Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, branding, intimacy, a lot of this comes through social media strategies. And Doug, I know that when you first worked with Artist Share, you really got a better sense of the kind of granularity I'm talking about in terms of every step of the production, every step of how you actually create a narrative for the album you're releasing. You documented really, really superbly on social media. Can you kind of explain some of the strategies that you learned from that experience?
Well, I think you hit on it with a term you just mentioned, is granularity, and realizing in your content, just the different levels. It's almost like a juicer, right? Like if you're making a juice, you squeeze a little orange, you grind some carrots up, you put some ginger in there, or however you guys make juices. If you juice, I think you know what I'm talking about, right? But with your content, especially new content, there's so many, if you really investigate it, there's so many aspects to be presented. And for me, it was always about, where I'm coming from is the experience of back in the day. You have a piece of vinyl. I got some vinyl here. Let's see what I get randomly here. Okay, I got the Manhattans. All right. So say you take this record.
What is that, a giant CD?
Yeah.
The CD.
You see
I
the
love
white
it.
glove? You
That's
see the
so
white
cool.
gloves? Isn't that amazing?
It's just great.
It's just great. And so, but on the back, it's got the producers, it's got the lyrics, it's got the guys, it's got the people in the band, who's playing French horn on that song,
Love
who's playing cello. So you sit down and you're like, okay, this is how this was made. And speaking of granularity, I mean, this is what you're talking about. So how do you recreate this today? Because you don't get this anymore. Well, people are buying vinyls, right?
Good point.
But how do you get that? And how do you present it digitally? And I think that's really where I was coming from with the Artist Share thing. While we were there, was to give the fan that insider experience. And I think you guys know I do like a lot of Latin jazz, salsa music, and the fan base. And I really looked at the fan base, and I looked at the demographic that this would appeal to. And there's tons of people in Colombia, tons of people in Peru, Mexico, blah, 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 blah. So just kind of bringing that together. Like when we went to, just a short little antidote here, when we went to Lima, Peru, we went with Spanish Harlem. We were opening up for the Fani All-Stars. So when we get to the Sheraton in Lima, Peru, there's legions of people, and anybody who got off the bus, musician, went, Doug Beavers, this guy, I have this record. They know your underwear size in Lima.
Love it.
Okay.
What is your underwear size, Doug? I'm curious.
By the way.
Yeah, no, well, it's been getting bigger lately. TMI? No, a bit. Anyway, so that's the thing. That's really where I was coming from with the social stuff, was really how to pull people in. And I've carried that now to Circle 9, the label that I came up with, and that we're all a part of this thing, is really how to present that insider experience. And my solution for now is really the subscription model, where people could come in for a year, they commit for a year, and they could sustainably support an artist. For us, these guys are doing like amazing things. And I'm personally am coming out of that live performance space. So I've really had to reinvent myself. Luckily, I've always loved, my master's degree is in composition. I got to study with Micah Benny at Manhattan School of Music. I've always had a passion for composition. And that's, as I realize as I get older, that is number one. I could play the shit out of that trombone, but it's really the compositional skill, arranging skill, production skill that's really helped me through this whole thing, and has really given me time to really figure out what's right in my life. And what's right in my life right now is this label, and this label is my life. So I think people are going to come to see that.
So for a lot of musicians, I don't know who started this whole metaphor, but it takes 10,000 hours to learn how to master something. And I'm curious, Rich, after 1,000 television programs writing music, you and I had this conversation where you said if you watch TV or film for this matter, and you turn off the sound, and you're not, the story goes away. I mean, the sound is everything. And you are, like you mentioned, sometimes you can work for hours on something that lasts for seconds. And you talked about knowing Pro Tools so well that it just doesn't get in the way anymore. You also talked about composing for the editor. Can you unpack that?
It's similar to you guys, right? Well, Doug, writing for the audience. He wants to make his crowd happy, and he wants them to buy records and have a great concert experience. I want the editor to be happy. I don't give a damn about anybody else, to be honest with you, because if the editor's happy, the editor's the one who puts it and marries what I give them to the scene. And a lot of times I don't know the scene. I write for a show, not a scene. So I have to take a really good shot at what I'm writing for, and I get the emotion across. And I think the point that I'm getting at is that I write for a very specific targeted audience. And I mentioned that I have no ego and I do not write for myself. I get the joy out of writing what I write. Don't get me wrong. And I have a lot of fun doing it. And Dave and I have a lot of fun working. Yesterday, we had a great day in the studio.
Yeah.
And, but there's a purpose behind everything I do. A targeted purpose. Every track out of thousands and thousands, every single one of them has a targeted purpose.
Do you ever compose for yourself?
Rarely. Isn't that strange? I lost the joy of it. I almost feel guilty if I'm writing something and I'm not writing it for a purpose. But that's being an entrepreneur. I can't help it. I'm a Capricorn entrepreneur. I can't help it. A good problem, right, Jenny?
I have a question. When you create these songs, is it off of a script? So or no, because you were saying that you may not know the scene, or
no, it's never off of a script. Sometimes I get a scene, sometimes I write to video, but most of the time it is simply for, okay, we're doing this show, write us hot rod music, and I like hot rods, and I drive very fast, so I'm good at that. But the point is I came up with something the other day, which is really true, because I really get into character. Sometimes I get so deep into character that I lose my mind. I get dangerously deep into the character when I'm writing for certain shows. And it's really about method acting, but I'm method composing. And it can get a little scary. I can get really weird and moody, and especially when I'm writing for dramas and crime shows and stuff. But I take what I do very seriously, and it's just a different way of writing.
That's cool.
It's impossible to not have you all together and talk about the extreme challenges of COVID. And I think for all of you, you'd express those challenges in different ways. I know, Doug, you just produced and recorded and mixed an album in the middle of a pandemic, a brand new, your solo album called Soul. I know, David, you've talked about adjusting to a gig economy where you're doing something you love, but you're now freelancing. And so finding gigs is really different. Jenny, we've talked about how you had all these big plans and they just disappeared. So if there are extreme challenges of COVID, it's easy to focus on the negatives, but I'm curious, and you guys can chime in, have there been any unexpected opportunities you've experienced that caught you by surprise?
Doug, what do you think about that? I'm curious about, because you play live the most.
Yeah, but again, it's almost like I'm coming from the mind space of you two cats, and
Right.
Jen, by extension, Jenny too. It's like, I've always been like this guy composing, and arranging. We're arranging for live gigs and stuff like that, and for people to cut sides so they can produce, so they can promote what would be their live show, essentially, right? It's not, the end is not TV, the end is not movies. For them, it's, can we book a show? So I've been doing a lot of that. It's thrown me more to that side of it. I mean, COVID has, and it's weird. There was a weird psychological effect of that. It's like, okay, so right now, I'm producing this record, I'm finishing this record up, and I'm starting a label, and that wasn't trivial. That was going and researching and getting a business plan together and really getting a solid design and you know, a whole mantra behind it that we can build up from, you know. So it gave me the time to do that. But a funny thing happened psychologically is like when I took the focus away from the trombone, then when I would just, you know, I have it set up, you know, you have to have it set up so you just go play it, you know. I mean, I've been playing that shit for 30 years, right? So it's just set up and you grab it. And something funny happened. I was just more present in playing it because you know that you're not going to be, but there's no pressure and you're able to just really almost like what Rich is saying, just come into character and just elicit wherever you're at, you know. And so in the playing, it's like I was more honest and more free and more transparent and not afraid of, oh, well, I didn't hit my high E or whatever. I mean, that's bullshit. No one cares. No one cares. People care about music, right, guys? People care about music that they can identify with. So that was an interesting side effect of you know, my trombone playing. But I mean, really, this is really, you know, really afforded me the opportunity to compose and get serious in a very serious way about what I do. And really, I've been able to focus in and really take all the side bullshit, you know, because when you're gigging and you get your trombone in the back of the car and you're going from place to place recording and you got to go do this, you come home, you're so tired, you can't really focus in. But this, you know, every morning you get up, you're in the same place. What are you going to do? And for me, it was always an opportunity. What are you going to do with this time? And for me, it was just jumping on that. Yeah.
Dave and Rich, I mean, you guys have worked from home forever. You've already been in the same place for a long time. So how did COVID enhance your work experience at all?
I have to say, go ahead. I have to say, no, it didn't change it. If the only thing it did is allow me to interface with the other team members that I work with. And I'm going to use Dave as an example. It allowed everyone to take a lot of time to study their craft and really get more proficient at recording from home, because that's what everybody is doing. And then you have to learn. I happen to know, Dave and I know a guy who works for one of the big audio manufacturers, and they can't keep up. And this is tube gear. They cannot keep up with sales. So the sales are off the charts for how much stuff people are buying. And that means that all people like us are recording at home. I mean, I've been doing it a long time, so for me, it's like the back of my hand, but everybody else is just learning. And I continue, like Dave and I both continue to learn and simply integrate. And the kit that you see behind Dave is I'm going to just explain this for a second. That's an electronic kit, but we have come up with a great hybrid method where Dave records part of his kit upstairs and part of his kit downstairs on the live kit. And that is just simply something we learned because we put so much time in, because we were home so much, you know, during this pandemic. So take advantage of the time. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I would say I remember probably about a month into COVID or 3 weeks in after we were quarantined, and a friend of mine calls me up and he's like, "Are you losing your mind yet?" And I was, you know, my answer was, "No, this is what I do every day." You know what I mean? This is the only difference is now my wife's at home and I have someone to talk to, as opposed to my cats and I staring at each other, right? Blank, like, "How you doing?" You know. But you know, the other thing is you know, like Rich said, like it has given us some time, you know, and we were kind of wondering if, you know, when the whole production side of things, like post-production, was going to drop off, and it really kind of has. And I think there was like a lull at one point, you know, just because everyone's freaked out and no one knows how to operate, you know, under these new circumstances where they can't be together. But I mean, people got it figured out pretty quickly, and I think it did give us some time to do some cool experimenting, you know. But on the same token, you know, all of a sudden, you know, assignments started coming back in again for, you know, music for different shows, you know, kind of all over the place. And I think we were all a little bit surprised that, you know, how quickly it came back and they figured it out and, you know, figured out how to get editors working from home and the right gear and, you know, enough bandwidth to be able to send massive files back and forth and the whole bit. But, you know, I would say, you know, not a lot's changed. It was just, you know, it was nice for summer to come so we could get outside and do stuff, you know, and that's like on a non-music level.
So Jenny, I'm going to give you a first shot at our last question, which is, you know, we've watched COVID radically change so many service industries, and people in the restaurant industry and live performance are, they not only say, for example, in New York City, they're estimating that 80% of restaurants may not make it back. And I'm curious, when we look at the music industry, all of us have seen this massive change. And I was curious, you know, starting with you, Jenny, what do you think, you know, different branches of the music industry will look like 5 years from now, post-COVID?
Gosh, you know, I think they're just gonna get more creative. Like now, how they have like it's really popular. I know I actually attended one concert. It was like a drive-in concert, and it's interesting to see how people adjust to it. Maybe because they're not in the music industry. So for me, I was looking at everything like from production and kind of how everything's behind the scene. But as I watched other people in how they were consuming the music and their experience, it was odd to see that they were just as much into it, maybe because they just missed being out and missed seeing their group, you know, favorite group or whatnot. So that was kind of interesting because I'm like, oh, this thing is probably not going to be well attended or this and that. And it was like on the contrary. So I think it's kind of like you build it and they come. So you can get, right now, I feel like you can get as creative as you want.
And it's pent up, right, Jenny? It's super pent up. I feel
Totally.
like when I talk to people in New
Yes.
York, that we were dying for, they just want to go and get a drink and hang out and listen to the band. That punto final. That's
Yeah.
it, you know, and it's like, so when it does open back up, it's going to be you know, like a rodeo.
I think and for me, it's been an opportunity really to master my craft. Number two, really network, because nobody's doing anything, right? So now you can have
Good
quality
point.
conversations. You're not just like on LinkedIn and they're like, oh, I'm working on my fiscal, you know, fourth quarter budget, and yeah, I'll get back to you. They're like, well, okay, so you're engaging in like real deal conversations. They either have to fulfill that budget or pass it on to another quarter or whatnot, and now they have the time to actually really look through a proposal or ask you more questions. Also, for me, it's been amazing just to see the different band members and their own endeavors and what they're doing, because I feel that as a booking agent, yes, I sell the band as a whole, but it's made up by all these talented musicians. So I love to be able to tell their stories too. Like, we are Spanish Harlem, but you know, Doug has this, and you know, so-and-so does this, and so just so they see the caliber of the talent that we're gonna bring in one room that's gonna kick ass. I love watching what they've been able to pour into during this time too, that they wouldn't have had the opportunity to do if they were, you know, on the road. Like maybe Circle 9, I don't know, Doug, wouldn't have launched right now, or maybe you did have plans for it to be, you know, in August, the launch. But this truly, you know, helped and probably gave you the time to really methodically think through it and how you're launching.
Yeah, Circle 9 was honestly in the works since October, you know, and then it hit, and then I found myself a time to actually go and push it through, you know. So that's how that happened. Yeah.
Dave and Rich, are you seeing more collaboration online because people can't do it physically? Are you seeing any new ways in which music is being produced that's actually exciting and different and more exotic? Or
I wish I had a fancy answer to that besides no. Simply because because the system that I've had in place for quite some time did not get altered in this pandemic. Now, the one thing, talk about drive-in concerts, I went to see Dave's band at a drive-in concert a couple weeks ago, and it was a blast. Oh my God. We pulled up our cars, we took out our chairs, we had our own little area under a tree.
Sounds fun.
It was great. It was awesome.
Yeah.
It was in a parking lot of a big outdoor kind of club, and we had a great time. I couldn't care where it was.
Yeah.
And you know, I had such a good time. It was good to see live music.
Yeah, I would say that's we've had the opportunity to do a few of those this summer. I mean, the rest of my gig schedule for the year got pretty much wiped out, except for one. And then we had a place that we played regularly that asked us if it would be into doing this parking lot car hop type thing, kind of like the 50s. And we're like, sure, you know, and it was like a huge tailgate. They kept cars spaced, you know, a certain amount of spots from each other.
Yeah, you had to park a few spots apart. It was cool.
But like everyone was so starved for live music. I think that honestly, I think when this comes back for real, it's going to come back huge. I think that I would say that's, you know, a lot of the concerts I've gone to in the last 20 years, none of them, for the most part, I would say on an, you know, running average, had the same intensity as they used to back in like the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, like where people were out of their minds to see a band. You know, people were, you know, weren't standing all the time, you know, weren't, you know, kind of going crazy for it. It's still, you know, enthusiastic, but not to those levels like they used to be. And I think that just this denial that everyone's kind of getting right now, I think that, you know, fast forward a couple years when things are back to normal again and you can do these things, I think people are going to be losing their minds again. Just like, wow, especially even like kids who never got to experience this stuff. And they've been seeing, you know, stuff on TV of, you know, old concerts and this and that. And, you know, they'll get to do it for the first time. You know, I mean, I think that, I think it'll come back probably stronger than it was before, you know, again, based on just the everyone's being denied. I was so excited just to be playing live music. You know what I mean? Just, it's been, you know, my last gig, I think was February, it was Leap Day, February 29th. And we had like a month off and then booked pretty much throughout the rest of the year. And our first March gig was, I want to say on the like 28th, maybe something like that. And that got canceled 2 weeks before. And I don't even know if that place is still open, quite frankly, you know what I mean? Like all these places. So.
But one of the things I've heard musicians say consistently is, you know, for example, if you break a hand and you can't play the saxophone for a month, for a lot of musicians, they feel physically off, sometimes even ill because they can't play their instrument. And now what I've heard from a lot of musicians is they feel equally as off because they can't connect with their communities. They can't connect with their audiences and they miss that energy. They miss that. So thank you all so much for joining us here and speaking with us in Latin Biz Today. Really appreciate seeing you all. I'm glad you're all well. And thanks to everyone out there for watching. I'm Michael Ambrosino for Latin Biz Today. Thank you, everyone.
Great job. Thank you.
Peace out. Thank you. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you.